All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Katie Stanton. I'm the program director for the Urban Manufacturing Alliance. Really pleased to be here today with everyone from our team as well as the Century Foundation. Together, we have launched our Industry and Inclusion 4.0 National Learning Cohort, and this afternoon is the first webinar that we're producing as a part of that. Before we dive into the topic today, which is pursuing equity, inclusion, and industrial rebirth in the age of COVID-19, I just want to take a couple of moments to do some housekeeping. So I'm sure most of you are familiar by now with the concept of a Zoom webinar, but as a quick refresher, there's a couple of ways that we'd love for you to participate. One is if you have any questions at any time for any of the panelists, please use the Q&A, not the chat, but rather the Q&A. And we have someone who's monitoring that, and we'll bring those questions up at the end of the program. But to start, before I pass it to introduce our moderator, we wanted to give you a chance to interact with us a little bit and learn a little bit more about you and why you're here. So if you all could pop open your chat, we would love for you to type in a story or a short phrase about why manufacturing matters to your community, to you or your family. It's something that's really at the core and heart of the reasons why we do our work, as manufacturing is important to us and we want to know why it's important to you. So pop that chat open. We'd love to see a story or an anecdote of why manufacturing matters to your community, why you're here today. And while you're doing that, I'm going to introduce our moderator. I'd love to introduce him. His name is Dr. Ron Williams. He is a professor of management at Coppin State University, and he also serves on UMA's board of directors. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Ron. Thanks again for everyone being here.
Thank you, Katie. Again, my name is Ron Williams, and I'm your moderator. This afternoon for the webinar, we're going to be discussing pursuing inclusion and industrial rebirth in the age of COVID-19. We have with us the leading members of a new national cohort of the urban workforce development organizations convened by the Century Foundation and Urban Manufacturing Alliance with the support of the Lumina Foundation. And our goal of this project is to help connect communities of color to good paying jobs and forge a more equitable future for manufacturing. During our time together, I will provide a brief introduction of our panel, followed by an introductory statement of my own. And then each panelist will then give a 5-minute statement in response to my introductory overview, and we will then proceed with a series of questions and discussion followed by a brief question and answer period in the chat. So let's go forward, and I will introduce our panelists this afternoon. We have with us Andrew Stetner, a senior fellow at the Century Foundation, Autumn Russell, executive director of Magnet, a youth workforce development program in Northeast Ohio, committed to providing scalable solutions for developing an advanced manufacturing workforce of the future. Lee Wellington, the founding executive director of the Urban Manufacturing Alliance. Randy Berth also is with us, chief innovation officer for the Wisconsin Regional Training Partnership, Big Step, a nationally recognized workforce development nonprofit organization. So welcome to you all. And let me start out by just giving you an introductory overview, so to speak. COVID-19 has revealed real vulnerabilities in the US manufacturing sector. And I believe that the vulnerabilities are best sort of captured in a historical context, because if you go back to the emergence of the U.S. as an industrial power in the early 20th century, we had a great migration of people, particularly from the South, and also immigrants from Europe who moved for two reasons. One, to escape oppression, and also for economic opportunity. Now it's not much different. People still migrate for those very reasons, but there are some similarities and some differences. One of the similarities is that we need a prepared workforce to meet the workforce demands that are current and those that are emerging. But some of the differences are that the minority population is much more diverse now. Also, technological change makes it more difficult to predict what workforce demands will be. Another difference is that, well, something that's been with us for a long time is the racial difficulties around issues of race in the country. All of those are happening in the context of the need for prepared workers in the manufacturing sector. So with that sort of backdrop, Andy, why don't you get us started with the presentation with those thoughts in mind?
Absolutely. And you asked us why manufacturing mattered. Here's a picture of my Chrysler Pacifica that brought me a lot of joy buying it during this COVID-19 crisis. And manufacturing, first of all, is about making beautiful and innovative products. In the case of cars, making them more efficient, which is crucial to saving our environment. But growing up in Detroit, manufacturing mattered to the whole community. The taxes it paid was key to the tax base and the ability to provide education, and of course, to providing good paying jobs. So we're really excited to be here with Ron and the rest of the panel today to launch what we think could be a truly historic project to build manufacturing and advance diversity, equity, inclusion. We're really grateful to our partners at Urban Manufacturing Alliance and also our cohort members and the Lumina Foundation for supporting this really important effort. You know, this effort started with us in 2017 when America woke up to the fact that deindustrialization really mattered to communities and to voters. And in places like Youngstown, Ohio, it was mattered a lot to inclusion. Youngstown, Ohio used to be the nation's 50th largest city, but after waves of factory closings and out-migration and segregationist housing policies, it became the city with the highest poorest concentration of African Americans in America. But when we went back to cities like Youngstown, people were not looking backward to manufacturing, but forward. Through building manufacturing as a source of good paying jobs for all communities, urban and rural, with innovation, access to capital, economic and workforce development. And indeed, manufacturing added back 1.4 million of the jobs it had lost during the Great Recession by 2018. But it's done so in a radically changed workplace and environment. For example, the amount of industrial robots used in factories doubled in the 10 years between 2009 and 2017. And that's just the beginning of the impacts of technologies, from computer-controlled machine tools to industrial sensors that are really changing every type of production. But those changes like automation are not simply replacing workers, but allowing companies to survive and compete globally. And the jobs that are here now still pay 13% more than jobs in other sectors. But there are stark divides in those jobs between union and non-union workers, between frontline and skilled trades and ownership that have major equity implications that we're addressing through our project. Go to the next slide.
So I'm going to jump in here, and Andy, I just want to echo your sentiments about how phenomenal it is to be working in partnership with the Century Foundation to really convene a pioneering group of workforce organizations that are rooting their approach in racial equity and racial justice. And so through this work, we really see an opportunity to promote industry and inclusion together. And that was really the origins of the name of this project. We're at a moment of tremendous opportunity where the manufacturing sector has more than 2 million unfilled jobs by some estimates. But then on the other hand, you have this perception problem, right? Where folks don't see manufacturing as a viable career pathway or an appealing career pathway or a pathway where they get to use their brain and their hands at the same time. And so we have the challenge of correcting for that. we also have a dire challenge of correcting for real racial equity issues, particularly as it relates to ownership. And you'll see that chart on the right looks at the relative level of ownership, both in the manufacturing sector and from ownership writ large. And what this suggests is that as we approach our workforce solutions, we can't just think about solving for entry-level manufacturing positions. We need to be thinking about career ladders. And what's really unique about the groups that we're convening is that they're all tuned into this issue of career ladders. We're also seeing a variety of interventions play out, both from the private sector and from organizational intermediaries, both nonprofits and public sector intermediaries. And that's something that we're really going to be looking to our cohort to lift up, tell stories about, and build research around. And I just want to draw out a couple of pieces of foundational research from UMA's perspective that are informing our approach to this work. So the first is our Equitable Innovation Economies initiative. And this was a collaboration right at the beginnings of UMA between Policy Link and Pratt Center, where we worked with 4 city agencies to better align an equity agenda with a manufacturing agenda. And one of the things that we really set out to do in this work is to show that there wasn't just a moral imperative, which should be important in and of itself to promoting equity alongside manufacturing, but also an economic imperative, particularly as we consider the fact that in 2 decades or so, we're going to be a majority people of color of nation. And so we have a tremendous opportunity to unlock if we really correct for the racial disparities in employment and income that have been widespread for generations in our country. And then I also just want to come back to an important, obvious point that we should absolutely create these equitable pathways because it's the just and fair thing to do. And that's what we're going to be drawing out from some of the work of our place-based cohort members today. But turning to the Equitable Innovation Economies initiatives, one of the things that we tried to do was encourage these public sector partners to embed a set of equity indicators in their work. And many of them, as we looked at them, were tied to workforce programming. So everything from widespread employee training to support tech adoption, to the presence of apprenticeships and internships in target communities. So moving to the next slide. After the Equitable Innovation Economies work, we dug into the characteristics of small and mid-sized manufacturers in a State of Urban Manufacturing report. And there, the vast majority of firms that we analyzed were 0 to 10 employees. And so while these companies had the plan to expand and grow their workforce, they didn't necessarily have the internal infrastructure to do that on their own. And so again, it came back to this theme of intermediaries becoming really, really critical to their ability to achieving their growth plans. And what this underscored is the importance of supporting the resilience of intermediaries. And that's what we're setting out to do, is really build capacity for these groups by creating a community that they can really bounce ideas off of one another. So now I'm going to turn it back to Andy, who's going to take this context that I've laid out around equity and inclusion and really now relate it back to this very unique time that we're in, where we're dealing with both a national awakening around racial injustice that's truly long overdue, and a health pandemic that's affecting so many, but also revealing the importance of manufacturing to our communities in ways that we never imagined before. So Andy, back to you.
So there you have a picture of OpenWorks makerspace in Baltimore, where Ron has studied, and they were an example of part of our manufacturing ecosystem that was turned their production to the urgent emergency of COVID-19 here, making face shields. And this crisis identified the imperative and risks in relying so much on an international supply chain, whose attention during this crisis was rightly turned inward into their own countries and their own PPE that was needed. And so while COVID-19 has made people understand how important manufacturing is, and it was deemed essential, the sector did still lose 1.1 million jobs, and corporate leadership is often focused right now on survival rather than, and that has a real risk of downplaying some momentum on diversity and equity and inclusion. And this would be a tragic mistake both in the awakening around racial justice that has happened in the past weeks and the ability of this sector to recover. So we are seeking to take the opportunity, in this moment to advance industry and inclusion. The slide Lee had before, their workforce is an existential crisis for manufacturing. The workforce is aged. It is not representative of that future majority. We must scale education and workforce to fulfill the potential of manufacturing to grow. We're hoping to learn how to scale, and that's a major topic of today, and how are organizations involved in our cohort, all innovators, adjusting their training and placement in the wake of COVID-19, recession, and racial justice. And how can we translate what we have identified, and we have a publication that's on our website today that Ron and Lee and Katie and I authored based on our initial conversations with this cohort, surfacing a genuine corporate interest in diversity, equity, inclusion in manufacturing companies. But how can we translate that into the social and cultural change needed within manufacturing to make that a reality? And we are, we're so excited to learn next from obviously our colleagues on the call today, from another group of cohort members and a much larger community of people. I know many of them are in the chat, people I've met and are interested in this topic over the next several years together.
Okay, thank you.
I'll turn to Autumn now to give us a little bit of her perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Autumn Russell. I am the Executive Director of Magnet's Early College, Early Career Program, commonly referred to as ECEC. And as Ron mentioned, we are located here in Northeast Ohio, specifically headquartered in Cleveland, Ohio. At Magnet, which is the Manufacturing Advocacy and Growth Network, we help manufacturers grow in Northeast Ohio. And as they grow, they obviously need more people. So the Early College, Early Career Program was built by manufacturers for manufacturers in an effort to grow the manufacturing workforce and help these manufacturers develop their own talent pipeline. And what we have done is really connected communities, high schools, and companies, leveraging the structure that has been there for many years. And we're also leveraging the support of outside organizations in an effort to provide opportunities for high school students, 11th and 12th graders, the opportunity to be exposed and create awareness around manufacturing careers while developing seamless career pathways into those careers. So we are currently in our third year of implementation. We have graduated 2 cohorts. Just this past May was our second cohort, which we're super excited about. Out of the students that actually completed our program, we are proud to say that 100% have either gone into manufacturing or straight into college. 63% of that those students going into manufacturing careers right out of college. And we have engaged 11 manufacturers, 10 high schools, 2 community college, and a multiple pool of support organizations to date. Next slide, please. So there are 3 major components of the ECEC program. The first is the work-based learning component. And this is where we're placing 11th and 12th graders in paid internships. They are placed in manufacturers and local manufacturers where they work 8 to 12 hours a week during the school year, getting the real hands-on experience. And we are a state recognized program, which means our students are able to be on machine. So they're not just shadowing, they're not just, sort of cleaning and behind the scenes, they're actually getting the hands-on experience, along with some project-based learning early on in the program. And during the summer, between 11th and 12th grade, they are full-time employees at these manufacturing plants. So they're 30 to 40 hours a week during that time. It's also coupled with education and training component, which includes free college credit, college courses where they earn real college credit, paid for by the state of Ohio through called CCP, College Credit Plus program. Through that, they also will receive an industry credential. And we also offer job readiness and soft skills training as well for our students. So when these students graduate, they will have 2 years work experience, industry credential, And they also have up to 15 credit hours towards a college degree in advanced manufacturing. What makes our program sort of unique is our holistic approach to mentorship. So understanding our student population, and our student population is 80+% of high poverty, low income students from high poverty, low income communities that we pull our students from. And so mentorship is really, really important in just supporting those students and addressing those barriers that come with the underserved population is really important to us. So we have different forms of mentorship, and we also provide transportation for all of our students to each part of our program. Next slide, please. We are unique and we understand unique, but we're very excited and happy to have our manufacturing extension partnership that is, having stability in the backbone of their commitment, and their knowledge has been super helpful in our workforce initiatives. As you can see, they've been around for over 30 years, and they're devoted to growing manufacturers locally while these manufacturers are completing globally. They have a very focused and emphasis on small to mid-sized manufacturers. However, I will note and be on record to say that MEPs are different in each state. Even though there is an MEP in every state, they are very different. They have different focuses. So I would encourage you to, if you like to explore as a resource MEP, to contact your local MEP and see what their focus is and how they could possibly support you. Next slide, please. So why ECEC wants to scale, and it's basically very mirrored to our primary objectives. The first is to move the needle on equity and inclusion. So as mentioned, 80+% of our student population are minority. And so we are giving opportunities for these students that would otherwise not have this opportunity. We're very focused on increasing the wage scale in the middle, and these populations into middle class positions. And we're just really focused on this equity and inclusion as it relates to job access and education access as well. We also want to heighten the awareness and close the manufacturing skills gap. There's a lot of talk about the manufacturing skills gap in relation to the awareness gap, saying that maybe the skills gap wouldn't be so wide if people were just aware of the opportunities in manufacturing. And so that's one of our goals and why we want to scale as well. And then as they understand and are aware of these opportunities, we want to continue to create more pathways into these careers and ways for students and just communities to get into these opportunities. Next slide. Okay, and I'm gonna hand it right over to Randy.
Well, thank you. And I am Randy Berth. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for the Wisconsin Regional Training Partnership Big Step, or sometimes called the matriarch of the organization, because I worked in manufacturing and had a 3-month leave of absence, and that was over 25 years ago. So this was an experiment on, can you use workforce development in a more economic development way, which has been successful for us. Every year or every 2 years, we conduct an industry needs analysis or assessment of what's happening in our manufacturing firms. And we typically are working on, what are the business conditions? How is the business going, both from an industry perspective and from that employer perspective, since we can identify early warning signs and sometimes prevent plant layoffs. But we can also help prepare for growth and expansion in other ways. And one of our big partners on the business side is our MEP, our Manufacturing Extension Partnership here in Wisconsin. The second area of the needs assessment is around workforce training from senior workforce and new hires. And then the third area is really around the future workforce, both short-term and long-term. And this assessment really guides our response. As an industry intermediary, the only boundary we have is serving our industry. So unlike some of our workforce partners or a community college, there's lines drawn somewhere about who they serve and who they can help. And as you know, in any manufacturing firm, you're not going to be, you may be located in one county, but you're serving and taking on people from 5 counties. So the nice thing about us not having any boundaries is also if someone else does something that will help our companies, we want to connect them. So we don't want to do something someone else does, but we want to really look at, from our lens, you know, in our tagline would be industry-led, worker-centered, and community-focused. So in responding to industry needs, I'm going to talk about 3, what I would say, big projects that really helped us scale up things that we could do in our organization and things other folks could do in their organizations or around the country. And the first thing that we did was really help develop a pre-employment, what we would call ELMS, or entry-level manufacturing skills, which is also something that can be funded by the Workforce Innovation Act funding in a very easy tuition vouchered way, so that it doesn't matter where a person lives, we can, you know, allow them in the training and never have them have to pay for anything, but take advantage of the, you know, biggest federally funded training projects that our country has. In our ELMS training, employers commit to hiring the successful training graduates. So the trainees are selected by the employer. The training is customized for that employer. So it can be 1 to 4 weeks, depending on what the employer needs and where the skill levels of the workers are. And as employers select, we find out that some people don't need training. Some people already have what they need and they just need the connection. So in many cases, our employers will hire directly from our group that go right into the shop. The second choice the employers have is to select the students for this pre-employment training, which is also a certified pre-apprenticeship program here in the state of Wisconsin. And of course, the third group of people that the employer can choose is that they're not a good fit. And then we work with them on, you know, why isn't this person a good fit for the training or for your industry? And we have a community workforce partnership. It's we have a community network of over 300 agencies, but we have a specific 14-member community workforce partnership, the Urban League, the Y, you know, some of the major and some of the smaller community and faith-based organizations that meet once a month to discuss how do we eliminate barriers to employment that are external from the type of skills or the other things. So the childcare, the driver's license, the high school diploma or GED, some of those kinds of things we work with our community partners on, and we try to keep them very connected to what our industry needs are and what our employers are asking for. The second scalable invention, I would say, is that we created a new occupation with the Department of Labor and a new apprenticeship program called the Industrial Manufacturing Technician. If you look at the hourly workers in most manufacturing firms, most of them are doing some type of production and some are doing skilled trades. But in a typical firm, let's say 100 people, you may have 5 or 6 in the skilled trades and you have 95 in the production areas, you know. So a lot of our apprenticeship programs, which are geared towards taking a rookie and turning them into a skilled trades person in, you know, all the other industries, is different in manufacturing, since in manufacturing, what's more typical is you take a production worker and you advance them into a skilled trades position. It's not something that takes a rookie from the street in most cases. Our IMT is something that we created with different types of manufacturing. So we really looked at whether they were making motorcycles or food or making something that was plastic or making something that was metal. We wanted to design something that would accommodate all these types of manufacturing work. And at the same time, we wanted to accommodate all types of occupations. So when we were designing the curriculum with the state of Wisconsin and our Bureau of Apprenticeship, we really had welders looking at welders, and we had assemblers, and we had people from the paint department and transportation distribution within the plant, CNC operators. We had actual workers from these occupations designing the curriculum that would be used for the IMT. We wanted to build in national standards and national certifications, and we hit something called the MSSC, the Manufacturing Skills Standards Certification. And a lot of our employers and unions were like, hey, we already helped design those. Let's look at that. And the 4 modules they looked at were safety, quality, production processes, and maintenance awareness. And everyone at the table is like, we need all that. And the high wage employers are like, well, if they don't have that, they shouldn't even be applying. And the low wage employers were saying, they don't need to be rocket scientists. They don't have to know all that. But the average manufacturing firm that wanted to look at what is fundamental for every manufacturing person in my shop to learn, all agreed on that. So within this 3,000 hour apprenticeship, there's 200 and I don't know, 60, 80, something like that hours of related instruction. A lot of that is within the MSSC certifications and industrial math, which is the same industrial math you would get if you were a maintenance machinist or machine repair, the same workplace communication and transition to trainer, because you know how to do your job. That doesn't mean you know how to teach your job. Which is a mandatory 8-hour course for all apprentices in the state of Wisconsin, and something that was originally designed with the WRTP in response to the needs assessment when they were saying, you know, with all this cross training. The other thing that, and we're just starting it off now, is, you know, we've got, you know, 100 and some, and I think the next slide we'll get into in a second, of how many employers we just surveyed. Oops, go back, I wasn't there yet. That don't sponsor apprentices. And so we're creating, and we were just received a Department of Labor grant to develop a multi-employer, multi-union joint apprenticeship committee sponsor that will be able to handle the sponsorship, assist with recruitment, and take care of the paperwork and making sure that training is managed. Because in many manufacturing firms, especially during the downsizing, they lost their HR departments, they got rid of their training, and now it's hard to bring it back. And so we want to make it easier for employers to do what they want to do and to do what's right. Now we can move to the next one.
And Randy, if you could, we just have about 2 minutes before we go into the broader discussion.
Yep. So in our needs assessment that we're in the middle of right now for 2020, we've got 140 employers that actually work well with their unions. 73 employers, this is a big one, and I even underlined it. They said the recruitment of qualified workers hindered business growth, which meant they were not working because they couldn't find workers. They were outsourcing, they were doing work in Mexico and in China. They were not taking on additional work because they couldn't find qualified workers. When we looked at it, only 80 of them were already apprentice sponsors. But there were 153 that would like to have apprentices if there was someone else doing all that work with the paperwork and the training and, you know, figuring out how to do all that. When we talked about the IMT, 129 of those employers were really interested in this production apprenticeship program. And you can see the rest on that. And then the last slide really looks at some of the demographics. And so I just want you to see that in the state of Wisconsin in the year 2019, we had 14,743 apprentices across the board. Now this is cosmetologists and barbers and firefighters and all kinds of stuff. And if you look at the demographics on the, you know, the amount of white males and females, you know, you can go down the list. When you look at overall the IMT, as opposed to the other industrial, all the other industrial apprenticeships, where 4% are women and 10% are people of color, the IMT has 22% women and 20% of people of color. And this is statewide numbers. So this keeps getting bigger and bigger. And over the last I don't know, it's only been approved in Wisconsin since 2014 and replicated in other states in 2015. And we've averaged 100 a year just with us in this occupation. And I see it getting bigger and better. And thank you.
Thank you. If we were in a more traditional world, this is where I would say give the panel a big hand. But in this new world of virtual webinars, I just want to commend you on the great work that you're doing. And also to address those who are participating now, if you would just take a couple of minutes and answer this question in the chat. What makes you hopeful about an equitable and inclusive future after COVID-19? Based on what you've heard, what is it that makes you hopeful about a more inclusive future, equitable future post-COVID-19? You can put those answers in your chat. And now I want to engage our panelists. We have such a wealth of information and expertise here in just a few questions. And the first question that I want to raise is, we are talking about millions of workers who are needed. I think one report that I saw from I think it was the National Association of Manufacturers, in September, there were over 500,000 jobs that weren't filled. And the next 10 years, I think there was a report in 2018, the next 10 years, there'll be about 4 million jobs. Half of those won't be filled because there are not enough trained workers. What is the value of the cohort approach to tackling the problem of this massive scale? And I'll toss that out. Anybody who would like to address that can do so. How does the cohort approach, how will that approach help us to tackle a problem of this massive size?
Yeah, I'll kick that off, Ron. I mean, we are all cognizant and aware that there's a major pool of untapped talent, right? Comprised of underrepresented, underserved populations, majority minority, those who are in need of income, higher income access, and things like that, which will lead to, higher paying jobs and college at the same time, which is pretty much the premise of ECEC and why we provide both the opportunity to go into college and into a career. We also recognize that with this population, there are many barriers, right? That some may say are accompanied by, some may say due to systemic racism. And this cohort, we will need a community-wide effort, first of all, to establish the pipeline in addressing these barriers. And so this cohorts will allow that coming together community-wide to address them. We'll need to add new things. Current existing structures may work. However, we will need to be more innovative, more creative, more collaborative in our approach. And so again, the concept of cohort, bringing the different entities together, different lenses, if you will, experiences together, is definitely would be beneficial and advantageous as we address those many barriers before we even can elect to provide access to that population.
Thank you. Would anyone else want to tackle that? Andy?
I would just agree that, when you downsize, who's left in these manufacturing firms are the white guys that took the apprenticeship program and have more skills. So over the years that we do our needs assessments and we look, and when there's a layoff, it is women and it is minorities that get laid off first. And so I would say skills matter, and we really have to look at making sure that our community understands these opportunities. And for people that aren't aware too, apprenticeship is paid. You are working during your entire apprenticeship. You are not paying for your training, and you are earning these credentials that are college credits and a journey workers card that is transferable anywhere in the world. It means something. And I think we want to have more of our folks get those skills so they can get in and get up in any manufacturing firm.
I was going to add, Ron, that having straddled both the program administration and policy world, sometimes you think of scale. We need one program that would train 5,000 people in each city. you need high quality programs in different neighborhoods, meeting the needs of different communities and building that trust. So what scale is going to have to look like, in my opinion, to address this 2.4 million workers needed is a lot of great programs in a lot of different communities, meeting those different communities' needs. And that's why I'm really excited about this cohort, everyone in it, and also the many people that are, kind of following this and want to be part of this movement.
I'll just add 2 points. One is an issue that Manufacturing Renaissance, another one of our cohort organizations, has raised a number of times, which is the value of training the trainers. So it's not just building a pipeline of folks that will go into the manufacturing sector, but making sure that there are people that are ready and willing to get this next generation of manufacturing workers onto factory floors. And there is this huge shortage. And so I think there are going to be a number of organizations across our cohort that are going to be looking at who is doing this training and how to make sure that the stewards of the manufacturing sector training are from the same communities that we want to see represented in the highest levels of the manufacturing sector, communities of color and women. And so it's really exciting to see that being brought up. And then the other thing I just want to say is we can't take a moment where there is significant closure to miss a beat in training. And so we have been looking across our cohort at how trainings are being maintained, either where factories remain opened or how programs are innovating to do this work virtually.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I want to pivot back and perhaps build on something that Autumn said. And she mentioned collaboration. And of course, this is a cohort approach. But to go a little deeper, in communities where there's been historical distrust and institutional distrust, how do you build the relational competencies between community, manufacturers, educational system, potential employees? How do you get beyond those trust barriers on the shop floor that will help move the needle in a significant way?
I can start. I can say basically for us, it's been the success. It's like, start small, have a success, build on that success. And when other people can see and learn, then that makes trust happen. Because if they can't see it and it doesn't make sense, or if there isn't a partnership around it, I think it's very difficult to have trust, because there has been years where there wasn't.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, and I would just say keeping that inclusive, or if you haven't starting that inclusive environment, including and providing a platform for all entities to come together at the table, making decisions as you develop initiatives and efforts. We have the unique responsibility to act as an intermediary in our space. So we are bringing together education partners, industry partners, community college partners together, and we have developed and created that platform for that to happen. I also would encourage to perhaps, go with what people call the low-hanging fruit, and those that are already willing or semi-willing to have these conversations and these discussions before it's brought to the broader, community or population. There has to be an education component. We have to educate everyone with a combination, not just of numbers, but antidotes. We need solutions. We need the whys and then the hows as well. And then a firm commitment from each, entity or individual. We need a collaborative commitment saying that we together will do this together, and this is my part in this movement, in this project, in this initiative. So those are kind of some of the thoughts that come to mind as it relates to that question.
What I'm very interested in learning, Ron, is how community-based organizations think about their mission as both meeting the needs of employers for workers, but also serving the community where they're based and being accountable to that community, and thus holding their employers accountable for goals around equity and inclusion. I think sometimes in the workforce development space, and certainly our workforce policies are geared this way, we're very focused on meeting industry needs. But if industry, and not just manufacturing industry across America, is not equitable, if we're just meeting industry needs, we're just feeding inequities. And increasingly, the workforce development field is thinking about that and thinking about its role in promoting quality jobs, something that WRTP has obviously said from the very beginning, and it's taken maybe 20 years or more, but people are really starting to catch up, that the role, particularly of the public in developing a workforce as opposed to maybe a private placement agency, is to serve these public goals.
Okay, thank you. I like Randy's initial comment, because I do know that one way to change the culture is to give new experiences. And if we're able to do that more, we can develop a culture of trust. But it starts with giving people new experiences. The world has changed. And of course, now we have to operate more virtually, and we may be doing so for a while. And I know it's had an impact on workforce development and workforce training. Who are some of the innovators in workforce development and workforce training in this new environment, or this emerging environment, when things are done much more virtually? I see heads nodding. Perhaps that's a sign that that's an opportunity area for us. Are there any?
Yeah, I think we're certainly all learning how to do that work. I think one thing that was interesting in our initial research, Ron, was that a lot of our cohort organizations are continuing to place and support their workers, but they themselves are not allowed on the factory floor because they're limiting it. So they're having to find new virtual ways of being connected to their employees and to their trainees and to their industry partners. So I think it's an opportunity for us to, foster those relationships and build on relations that we already have had, and cement them and help get each other through these difficult times.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that, Andy. When you asked the question, Ron, about who are the current innovators, I'd say we all will become the current, innovators of what this will look like virtually. It's up to the industry experts and all of us to sort of be open-minded and come up with those creative ways to connect virtually and still, effectively execute what we have been on a virtual platform. I just believe that our level of success will be contingent upon our ability to adapt to this change. And as open and ready as we are to make that change and make those changes, success will come with that.
Very good. Yeah, learn fast. We are all learning very, very quickly. Because the world is changing so much, what are the implications for skill development when production technology is changing so quickly? One report I read recently said that 10 years from now, 85% of the jobs that will exist 10 years from now have not been created yet. With things changing that rapidly, how do we make projections and how do we prepare?
Well, I think from my perspective, that's why I believe so much in the apprenticeship model, because you're learning and earning while you're on the floor and changing. And when you think about problem solving and adapting to new technologies and new work processes, it is continuous improvement. And I think that's sometimes why employers are frustrated with, some of the community colleges and the schools, because they're like, we don't need curriculum developed in 6 months. We need it now. And so I think that just-in-time manufacturing means just-in-time skills and just-in-time response to those skills all the time.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Randy. I don't have much more to add to that. That's exactly how I feel about the hands-on experience, and just really just instilling in our students in particular, just the lifelong learning concept that things will forever be changing. You forever remain a student. But we do lean on our employers to help us, with the hands-on training and experience.
One thing that's very interesting, one of our advisory board members is from a national credentialing organization, NIMS, and how they're trying to address that is, rather than thinking of credentials as something that's static and you get it in the workbook, but rather thinking about it going to the employers in a community and asking them, how do they want to test the competencies of workers that are entering into that factory. So building on their core credentials, but then seeing how they need to be really applied, because that's what the employers are looking for, not just a static credential, but something that is very current. I also think it puts a premium on fundamental skills, whether it be numeracy, particularly increasingly digital literacy, that are going to be important to adapt to changes that are happening in manufacturing and other sectors right now.
The only thing I might add here is that employment and conversations around job creation might not be the first way into creating more robust industry partnerships. And so for many of our cohort organizations, the workforce programming is just one component of the services, and asking industry partners in this moment of time, how are things going? How is business looking? How are you adapting to potentially your end market looking differently than it used to? And engaging in those conversations in this moment in time can set us up for an open dialogue around the skills that are needed for prospective manufacturing workers 3-6 months from now.
Okay. With things changing so rapidly and looking beyond COVID-19, as massive as the impact has been in terms of just everything across the board, lost lives and the impact that it's had on communities of color, and all of that. Do any of you see an opportunity beyond COVID-19 in terms of everything has been so disrupted? Does that mean that we can start and work on some things that we may not have been able to work on prior to COVID? Does anyone have any thoughts in that regard?
I would just say that across all segments of what makes a manufacturing ecosystem robust, whether you're talking about workforce or sourcing and supply chains, or recognition of who your manufacturers are, we're seeing greater partnership between government and the manufacturing sector. And it might be around PPE today, but many of those relationships can and should be institutionalized, and can be better institutionalized to create sustained investment in our workforce systems. So there was a very, very immediate need to understand local and regional manufacturing capacity. That need still exists today, but it shouldn't just be in moments of crisis that we reach out and create these partnerships. And our sincere hope and our effort through this project is to make sure that there is now not only an effort to partner with these firms and these intermediary organizations today, but a sustained investment in workforce systems.
Thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in on opportunities that may result as a result of the disruption that has happened?
Well, I'll just say, in our program, it did give us even though our program did not stop, it didn't stop, it did slow down a bit. And so we did have some time to really look at our model, really, do an operational analysis of how our program is run. Do we really have a model today that not only works today, but will it work tomorrow? Inclusive of, pandemics, right? We didn't have that pandemic emergency plan readily available. So we have had the opportunity to kind of step back to retool some things. And some of the things that we put in place are virtual. We're working on, creating a virtual platform for onboarding, for applying to the program, doing some training. And because of COVID-19, that's not something that we'll just temporarily have in our program, but it will now be a part of our program to continuously enhance it and to grow it. So yes, to your point, Ron, we definitely had some moments where it's totally disrupted, but we've also had, great moments where we're like, well, we can make this better and use this as an opportunity. Okay,
we're getting ready this is our final, question, and if each one of you could weigh in, if you had an opportunity to provide a single solution that would advance our pursuit of inclusion and industrial rebirth, what would you choose? what would be your action that you would take? And then we'll pivot and take a couple of questions from our participants.
Well,
I guess if
my first reaction is some more access to capital, so we can have more firms, manufacturing firms that are owned by people of color, to lift up that example and create a new layer of ownership and wealth and opportunity.
Very good.
And I would say, however we can increase the manufacturing industry and help it grow without losing job quality. I think you want to look at quality employers, quality jobs, and skills matter.
Very good.
Yeah, I would echo Andy and just say access to capital, and primarily to address those barriers that we've talked about in previous, in this conversation of, like, for instance, transportation and childcare, and even mentorship. Just being able to allocate funding and resources towards those resources.
And I'll take this one for you, May. I think what I would love to see is something Autumn touched on in her presentation, which was we have a skills gap, but I think there's also a values gap. And so really realigning our country's value that we assign to manufacturing and careers in manufacturing, so that when these jobs and training opportunities are available, we have folks who are really interested and understand the kind of family sustaining wages and career pathways that exist through them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And this has been really rich. And Amanda, if you could, I'm sure there are a couple of questions from our participants that they would like to present to the panelists. So if you could give us a couple of questions from our participants.
Thanks, Ron. Hi, everyone. We received many great questions before and during the event. Unfortunately, we're only going to have time for one, just to keep everyone's time in mind, but I think it's a representative one, and we're collecting all the questions and hope to answer them on social media and in future communications. So the question is, how do your organizations address diversity, equity, and inclusion, the climate of diversity, equity, and inclusion within firms, to surface and address potential issues for the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and worker of color community? And relatedly, what is the strategy for moving the sector and your programs forward to be more actively anti-racist?
That's a lot. Who would like to tackle that?
I'll take a shot at it. I would just say our program, we've been a part of this work. It's not new to us. Again, we are serving the minority population. Our work has always been to provide not solely those opportunities to that population, but a very, very large focus. And so there's not a whole lot of pivoting or changes that we need to make as it relates to our objective, our goals, and our mission. We have always just had that in mind. And so I'll just say to continue in the work that we are doing, providing these opportunities to these communities, tapping into additional resources that have now been released in order to continue our work is what I would say that we probably have, we'll kind of pivot into doing. But
The one thing I would say is that you perform to what you're measured on. The Joint Center on Political Economic Studies surveyed 23 studies of federally job training programs, evaluations. Only 3 of those studies included results by race. So one thing we need to really do is to bring equity metrics into the workforce and education field across the sectors, especially in manufacturing.
I would just also add that I think, taking the time to work, and I know a lot of our cohort members are doing this already, but really taking the time to work with the industry partners around how to become more culturally competent, more anti-racist, more in tune with working with BIPOC communities as well.
Yes, the only thing I would add is, that is what we do, right? That's been our mission from day one. So part of our daily life as much as we can, and we always want to do better and more. But I agree with Andy, it should always be measured.
Okay, well, thank you very much. This has been very rich, and I appreciate all of the contributions that all of you have made and all of those who are participating. I am very proud to be a part of this work. I thank the Century Foundation and UMA, Lumina Foundation, everybody who's making this happen. And of course, this is just a beginning conversation. I'm looking forward to the future and really making a difference in this work. So I'll pass it back to you, Katie.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks everyone for joining us. Just one more big thank you to Randy and Autumn for sharing your work with us today. There's so much more. There were a number of things popping up in the chat with links to different videos and explanations of your work. So we'll be sure to distribute those as well. But we really appreciate your time. Thank you to everyone behind the scenes from the Century Foundation who has helped us run this webinar. Andy, of course, to you and Amanda for co-leading this with UMA. And of course, Ron, thank you for being our research partner and our moderator today. And finally, another thank you to the Lumina Foundation, whose support is invaluable to this work and bringing us all together. I put our Twitter handles in the chat. Feel free to follow both Century Foundation and UMA on Twitter. We'll be posting, the recording of this event and some takeaways, and you can just keep tabs on us broadly. But we really appreciate everyone's time, and thanks again for joining us today. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.